morning. Today's Friday. Chav Gimel Iyar Tavshin Ayin Daled. We're in Teres Menachem. Say from Mamar Chamisha Kinyanim Beis. The Mamar of Shabbos Pashas Bar Midbar. Before Chamachedesh Erev Chedesh Sivan Tavshin Yud Beis. We are on page Reish Pei Hey in the middle of chapter 3. To recap, to bring us up to speed where we're up to, the Rebbe is explaining the idea of kinyan, the tool by which one acquires something in order for it to leave the domain of the seller and enter the domain of the buyer. So the Rebbe brought that there are two, he's focusing on two kinyanim. The kinyan known as Meshicha and a kinyan known as Kesef. One way to acquire something is through drawing it into your rishus, into your domain. And the other one is to pay for it. Do we need one? Do we need both? So there's a machlekes, there's a dispute in the Gemara in Baba Metzia between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish says that the act of drawing the object into your domain constitutes acquisition. And through this you become obligated to pay for it. Rabbi Yochanan says that from so far as the Torah is concerned, the biblical institution, the biblical framework for acquiring something is money. That even if you don't draw it actually into your domain, you just paid for it, really and truly it already becomes yours. However, the Chachamim, the sages, said that you need Meshicha. That even though you paid for it, you don't acquire it until when? Until you actually draw it into your domain. Why?
Is that a third opinion or qualification of Red Lakish's opinion?
No, that's a second opinion. My third opinion.
Yeah, because you said one was acquisition.
No, how do you...
And the other one was payment alone is sufficient. And then you said...
No.
Yeah.
Acquisition means to acquire it. How do I acquire? How do I become the owner?
So the qualification of the first opinion is acquisition connotes drawing it
Into correct.
So that's part of the first opinion.
That is the first opinion, that Meshicha is Kaina. And that causes you, drawing it into your domain, is what causes the acquisition. And as a result of drawing it into your domain, you now become obligated to pay for it. It's an obligation. You have an obligation to pay. Right? Now, Rabbi Yochanan says that
you have to come on it to draw it into your domain. I mean, if you just take an object from another person... No,
of course. No, we're talking about two people are discussing a transaction.
Yeah, okay.
And they agree to, one agrees to sell, the other one agrees to buy it. Okay. When is the sale completed?
I got you.
So Rish Lakish says, when you draw it into your reshus, min ha-Torah. The Torah says, once you draw it into your reshus, into your domain, that's when the sale is complete. Up until that point, the sale isn't complete.
Right.
Even if you paid for it. Rish Lakish says, Rabbi Yochanan says, that min ha-Torah, so far as the Torah is concerned, the biblical obligation, the biblical constitution of acquisition is paying for it. Once you paid for it, even if it remained in the reshus, in the domain of the seller, it becomes yours. It was the Chachamim that came along, the sages, and said, no, the sale will only be complete, according to Rabbi Yochanan, once you draw it into your domain. As long as it's still in the domain of the seller, even if you paid for it, it has not become yours. Why? It's a takana. They foresaw the possibility of a problem, and they addressed it. What would be the problem? What would happen if the buyer buys wheat, pays for it, and leaves it in the storage house of the seller, and there's a fire, and the wheat gets burnt? So if it's the seller's, the loss is his. If it's the buyer's, the loss is the buyer's.
So it's similar to when you sell, when the Rob sells
The chametz.
chametz.
But there's other kinyanim. There are other kinyanim besides these two. There's kinyan agav. And actually, you're when you sell the chametz, you're actually also transferring the actual space. You're not only selling the chametz, right? That's why you have to seal. One of the reasons why you have to seal it off and close it because it's no longer yours. So, if going back to Mashiach and Kinyan, according to Rabbi Yechanan, if the wheat will still remain the seller's, he will be a lot more cautious and a lot more motivated to make sure that nothing happens to the merchandise because it's still his. So for that purpose, Rabbi Yechanan said the Chachamim instituted that although, so far as the Torah is concerned, paying for it already causes the transfer, nevertheless, they said in addition to that, you need Mashiach, you need actually to draw it for it to become the buyers for the reason that I just mentioned. What's the difference between the two? 4 lines from the top, page Reish Peheva. The difference between the two, when you draw the object, the function, the action of the acquisition is in what? It is in the fact you demonstrate that the object has entered into your domain. Therefore, that's why, where does Mashiach actually help?
What does Mahani mean?
Help. Where is Mashiach effective? Only in a private domain or in a small lane. If I transact, the transaction takes place in the public domain, and the seller is standing in one place, and the buyer is standing in another place, and he draws it from the seller, he pulls it. It doesn't become his because it's in the public domain. It needs to be in an area, in a space where it is more discernible and obvious that it's actually entering somehow into the domain of the buyer. And through the Mashiach, through the drawing, the purchaser becomes obligated to give money, to hand over money to the seller, in accordance with the sum that they have agreed between them. So that is Mashiach. Mashiach actually demonstrates, drawing it demonstrates physically that you're taking it from the buyer's rishus domain into the purchaser's domain. But that's not the case when you pay money. The function, the action of the acquisition is in such a mode, in such a manner. There is no change that takes place in the actual object. Not even what? Not even the movement of it from the seller's domain to the buyer's domain. And it's because of that, goes to the Rabbanan, the Chachamim made the Gzeira, they instituted, they decreed that the buyer does not acquire it until he draws the object. Why? Because through this it becomes obvious that it enters into his domain. How does this play out in the spiritual sense? This is beautiful. So too it is in the idea of acquisition. In the spiritual sense, because for when we talk about all matters of the world, it says Asher bara Elokim lasis, right? In Bereshis, as we say in Kiddush, and Hashem rested from all the work that He did.
Yeah.
Because on that day, on the 7th day, Hashem rested from all the actions that He, from all the work that He did. What does it mean? It says la'asos. It doesn't say asher oso. It says la'asos, to do in the future tense. Really, it should have said asher oso. Why does it say la'asos? This comes to teach us. The Chachamim say Rashi brings it and so on and so forth. Medrash l'sakim, that Hashem left something in the world undone. Shekol mashabara. Anything that was created in the world, tzarich tikkun, needs fixing, it needs completion. This means that so far as creation is concerned, creation is in such a way, it lacks completion. And from the fact that it lacks shleimus, that it lacks completion, it's understood that it is not, in brackets, yet in the domain of holiness, which would mean in the domain of Hashem. He's left something undone, which means that we have to do something in order to bring it into the domain of Kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? The key, because as the Tikkun says in a number of places, is brought in the Kabbalah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is what? Hashem is what? Total completeness, the wholesomeness of everything. He's totally whole. So something, it follows therefore that Kaviyachol, so to speak, if something is not b'shleimus, something lacks wholesomeness, completeness, it is not in the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, Rishus HaKadosh, the domain of holiness. What is necessary to bring it into the Rishus HaKadosh, into the domain of holiness? That's why we need this idea of serving Hashem, the work of man, to effectuate, to bring about the acquisition of Hashem. That all matters of the world should be elevated into the domain of Hashem. Rishus HaYachid, the private domain, or the way the Rebbe teaches it over here, the way the Rebbe defines it, the domain of the only one, the Yechid Shel Olam, the domain of Hashem, the oneness of the world, the only one of the world, which in worlds, in realms, which realm in the spiritual sense, from the four realms, is called Rishus HaYachid, where Hashem is present totally and completely. The Koy Al Olam Atzilus, this is a reference to the realm of Atzilus, the world of emanation, as we said before. Shenikra Olam Mai. Olam Atzilus, the realm of Atzilus, is called His world, because as we mentioned before, in Atzilus, in Atzilus it's all Elokus, it's only Gilei Ahalim. Everything in Atzilus is godliness, even the Kalim, right? Even the vessels are godliness. They're a revelation of God's power to limit. So what's called Olam Mai, Hashem's world? Atzilus. So the idea is to take everything in the world and bring it into His world, to lift it up to Atzilus. Well, Kinyan said this acquisition and this tool of acquisition, Yeshna Beisefanim. There are two ways how to do this. Mishicha v'kesef. Drawing the object physically, or in this sense, spiritually, metaphysically, right? And the other one is kesef, is money. What is the idea of Mishicha and kesef in Ruchnis in the spiritual sense? Mishicha, the idea of drawing koya aliyas kol inyani ha'adam v'ha'olam shenimshachim v'elim l'shus ha'kedusha. This is a reference, Mashiach drawing it is a reference to the elevation of all the matters of the human being and all the matters of the world that are drawn and are lifted up and go up and are elevated to the domain of holiness. How? This is through the general idea of a man serving Hashem in a mode of, in a manner of Isarusa Lasata, an awakening from above. An awakening from below. The kesef, what's the idea of kesef? Money. The physical, the simple meaning of kesef is money. What is it in the spiritual sense? Kesef is meloshin nichseif nichsafti. And you did nefesh. We say, yeah, ki ze kama nichseif nichsafti. Right? How much I have yearned, I have desired, I have loved. Kesef. I guess maybe that's why the people are drawn so much to money. But kesef is what? Huh?
Stick to Nusachari.
Nusachari. Kesef is nichseif nichsafti. Yearning, loving, desiring. This is koi ala ava. This is a reference to the love shenisheches mulmaila, which is drawn down from above, in a mode of the awakening from above. So a Meshicha is man's initiative to be elevated to Atzilus. Kesef, love, is Hashem's initiative, the initiative from above to draw the person in. In these two modes of Kinyan, of acquisition, there are two ways. There are two ways of how this can happen. Well, Hold on. I don't want to lose the train of thought. Similar to the two modes, the two ways of actually the acquisition of money in the simple sense. Does the money change hands? What comes first? Does the two opinions mentioned the Shlokish and Rabbi Yochanan? There are two ways. Whether the kinyan, the acquisition, is effectuated through the money. Minatayra, that is what? That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. That the money itself already causes the acquisition. And after that, you also need to draw it for the purposes that Rabbi Yochanan mentioned. But what comes first? The kesef, and then comes the Meshicha, which means first there's this Rusu de la Eila. Rebbe combines both opinions together. Because it can happen, because in Avodah, in the spiritual sense, we have both, right? So there's two. One is that the kesef, the love, the initiative from above comes first, and then comes the Lasata, the initiative of man below. Or the other way around. That first there's initiative from below, the Meshicha, which is the Kinyan, as the Shlakish says, right? Which effectuates the kinyan, and that brings about what? The kesef, the obligation to pay, or the initiative from above. What is this idea in the idea of kesef? In the spiritual sense, this is a reference to the drawing down from above, the initiative from above. One is the initiative from above, which comes first and brings to the initiative from below.
Yeah.
That would be kesef before the Mashiach. Then the other one is the awakening from above, which comes and follows the initiative, comes after and follows the initiative from below. Kesef shalachei Mashiach. This would be the kesef after the function of drawing. As we know in Chassidus, it is explained that there are two isarusa. There are two awakenings from above. One is an awakening from above, which precedes the awakening from below, right? Which is more like an asinas koyach. That's a giving of strength for the person to be able to. Right? Sometimes we're awakened suddenly with a desire to be better, more connected to Hashem. But if we don't follow it up with an initiative from below and actually work with it, it passes. Why? Because it's from above. It's like the sun comes and shines and then sets. But that is the Yisrus that comes from above is not dependent on the person's initiative because it's just from above. But then it should be followed by an awakening from below, and the awakening from below, when the person puts in his effort, that in turn causes an additional Yisrus which follows this Yisrus. That causes an additional awakening from above in response to what? To the person's initiative from below. So again, Meshicha is the person's initiative. Kesef, Meshicha is another way of saying Yisrus Ata. Kesef, Nichsev Nichsafti is the idea of the awakening from above. So there are two opinions which are effective, I guess, in different scenarios. Does Meshicha come first? Does the Yisrus Ata, man's initiative from below, come first, which causes the Kesef, which causes the initiative from above? Or the other way around, does the initiative of above does the Kesef precede the Meshicha? So in Ruchnius, in the spiritual sense, both Rabbi Yechanan's and Rish Lakish's opinion, both opinions are really valid and effective, depending on the situation and the scenario.
I did not grasp why money, the kesef, relates to. I didn't quite understand.
Kesef is the idea of nichseif nichsafti,
Yeah, so
which means love. The way the Rebbe explains it over here is, it's Hashem showing His love to Hashem more.
why is that alluded to with the analogy of kesef? I mean, the first one you understand because you're transferring, Hashem. But the second one, I don't know.
Kesef is another word for love.
It is?
Nichseif nichsafti.
I see.
You look and you did nefesh.
Yeah.
He's a kama nichseif nichsafti. Open up your English to it.
Right.
Before the Chun Ranana.
Right.
You look and you did nefesh. It says, Shechazah. You look it up. I yearned. So who's yearning? Who's loving? Hashem shows His love to man, and that causes man to be awakened with a desire to want to be attached to Hashem. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the idea. One is Mashiach is another word for Yisrus L'Sata, the awakening from below. Kesef is another word for Yisrus the awakening from above.
Right.
And the two opinions of Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish
Right.
slot into different scenarios. Rish Lakish, who says that Mashiach is the kinyan and Kesef follows, he's talking about the awakening from below that comes first and that causes the awakening from above. Rabbi Yechon says the other way around. That we're talking about the awakening from above that precedes and gives the Nisan for the awakening from below.
Okay.
And then the Rebbe goes into explaining Ahava and the Kinyanim and so forth.
No, why not?
Continue Mitzvah Shem on Sunday.